you, Mr. President, that you can count on our wholehearted support. I'd also like to welcome the 5 new non-permanent members who are beginning their 2-year term on the Security Council, and to wish them successful and fruitful work. I also thank Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu for presenting the 87th monthly report of the OPCW General Director on the implementation of Resolution 2118. Thank you very much. Colleagues, it's very symbolic that we are beginning our work this year with the discussion of the Syrian chemical dossier in an open format. On our initiative, in September, the Security Council meeting on this issue was open, which allowed everybody to follow this subject and to receive information firsthand. It's to be welcomed that this time, no member of the Council spoke against such a meeting. This is certainly a positive signal and evidence that all of the members of the Council have realized that it's important to have a transparent discussion on this subject. Transparency and a factual approach that is not biased are principles that Russia has advocated within the Council throughout 2020 on the chemical dossier in Syria. To this end, we held a meeting on the 28th of September in an area format with the participation of the independent experts Ian Henderson, Theodore Postel, and Attila Mate. In October, on Russia's initiative, the Council heard the views of the former Director General of OPCW, Mr. Bustani, a professional with a faultless reputation and many years of experience leading the organization. His statement, which we had to read out because of the position of Western delegations, gives an objective view of the situation within the OPCW, which suffers serious problems for its reputation and effectiveness. For a few months, we have been trying to invite to the Security Council to discuss the Syrian dossier the current director of the OPCW, Fernando Arias. For a long time, he avoided this for a range of different pretexts. Finally, in December, Mr. Arias did nonetheless speak to the Council as a rapporteur. Insisting on his invitation, we hoped that the respected Director General would finally give us an explanation about those issues that had accumulated in the work of the OPCW Technical Secretariat, including on the greater number of inconsistencies and violations on the Syrian chemical dossier that had become ever more striking. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. The Director General was limited himself only to formal repetitions of theses that were already familiar to all. Nothing new was heard from him in this meeting, either in its open or its closed components. In addition, unfortunately, there wasn't a fully fledged briefing from Mr. Arias. The open part of the video conference was suddenly broken off and moved to a closed format. Nobody was able to explain why this happened. Ultimately, the Director General avoided answering questions in the auditorium during the open part of the meeting, even though this approach runs against the grain of the normal practice of rapporteurs to the Security Council. We hope that this situation won't be repeated in the future. We hope that in the near future, Mr. Arias will nonetheless find within himself the courage to once again appear before the Council and answer our questions publicly. There is a list of those questions from those who were present in the discussion on the 11th of December. For information and for your convenience, we plan to redistribute that list once again. Mr. President, allow me to briefly get the new members of the Council up to date on the issues and to explain why the discussion of the Syrian chemical dossier gives rise to so many emotions within the Council. Let's turn to the facts. Syria, voluntarily, with the support of Russia, acceded to the OPCW, fulfilling its first obligation under the or statement rather, under the Chemical Weapons Convention and getting rid of all of its chemical weapons. In 2014, the Syrian military chemical program was fully closed. The reserves of chemical weapons were liquidated, and production facilities for chemical weapons were destroyed. The OPCW confirmed this repeatedly. Since then, Syria has worked wholeheartedly with the OPCW and its technical secretariat, including the initial fact-finding mission, and also with all of the missions to investigate on the ground. Unfortunately, hopes that all of this would enable us to leave behind accusations directed at the Syrian government about the use of chemical weapons against its population did not come to anything. For all of these years, a number of states have used the chemical card, if you like, in order to increase pressure on the Syrian government, which they have unsuccessfully tried to bring down in the wave of the so-called Arab Spring. I'm not going to get into the details, but the facts are that Western countries, time and again, put forward very serious accusations toward Damascus, referring to put it mildly, unconvincing evidence in the form of video clips from social networks or supposed statements from biased witnesses from among a number of different groups among the anti-government opposition or the infamous white helmets. Having said that, evidence of the contrary, which is provided not only by the Syrian Arab Republic, but also Russia and a whole range of independent experts and organizations, is steadfastly ignored. Unfortunately, the negative role in this is played by the secretariat, the technical secretariat of the OPCW. Initially, we had some hopes that it would be able to keep clearly to its technical mandate and take an unbiased approach to reviewing the alleged use of chemical weapons within Syria. However, these hopes very quickly came to nothing. Examples of the inconsistencies in the technical secretariat's reports began with the very first reports of the fact-finding mission, where shells fell into ventilation shafts were wrong in terms of their diameter, and also there was bombing instead of this. Bombs went five kilometers beyond their targets, or activists from the White Helmets allegedly collected samples of sarin with their bare hands. The further we went, the worse it got. The technical secretariat also didn't even try to follow normal practice in the procedure for collecting evidence, including maintaining a chain of custody for its evidence. When its individual colleagues who didn't have any conscience raised the alarm and began to refuse to take part in the process, the leaders of the technical secretariat began to use repression and intimidation, repressing the facts and applying pressure to those who thought differently. Nonetheless, by the beginning of 2021, the range of different speakers, the range of evidence of direct manipulation and internal violations within the technical secretariat itself had reached a critical mass. I have to list just a few of them. Well, I had to list them for several hours. The most clear examples were the flagrant violations in investigating Han Sheikhoun in April 2017 and in Duma in April 2018. I encourage everybody who's interested to, in an objective vision of this issue, to study the material provided by independent experts during the meeting, the area formula meeting that I mentioned that took place on the 28th of September. From this, it follows that the conclusions of the technical secretariat on Han Sheikhoun and Duma violate the elementary laws of physics. I'd also draw your evidence to the evidence of the former OPCW inspector who took part in the investigation of the incident in Duma, Ian Henderson, saying that the leaders of the technical secretariat had biased the conclusions on the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government under direct pressure of Western countries. We have a summary, you have a summary of this area formula meeting, and on our request, it can also be quickly redistributed as an official document of the Security Council and to the General Assembly. Mr. President, the report of the group on identifying and investigating the situation in Al-Tamin in 2017 as the culmination of all of the bad faith efforts of the Technical Secretariat. This was a politically biased, factually unreliable, and technically unconvincing document, which was roundly criticized by experts. We have already expounded our detailed criticism, and our arguments have been disseminated as an official Security Council document in June last year. However, you don't have to even be an expert to understand that the need for hypothetical use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government in that moment simply did not exist, since at this period the Syrian army was already carrying out a successful offensive and had brought back under its control more than 75% of territory. Nonetheless, this highly dubious report was at the basis of the anti-Syrian allegations made by the Executive Committee of the OPCW, as in its session in July last year. This decision called on the Syrian Arab Republic to do things that were simply impossible, to declare that it had chemical weapons and facilities connected with them, which it simply did not have. Therefore, Syria was simply not able to fulfill this ultimatum. Ultimately now, our Western colleagues are trying to begin a process through the rules within the OPCW. We hope that the majority of declarations in the Conference of the States Party in April will refuse to take part in this provocation and this decision, this punitive decision that's being initiated by Western countries. With regard to the latest report of the Director General on the implementation of Resolution 2118, then we are seriously concerned that within it, once again, there are accusatory passages on open issues of the initial declaration. As we know from the former Inspector Ian Henderson, who spoke during the ARIA formula meeting, the leaders of the Technical Secretariat gave the mission for the initial declaration a direct indication to keep it open. With this approach, whatever the Syrians did to justify themselves, it simply would not be possible for them to close the dossier. I'd also like to recall that according to this same expert, in the initial stage of accession to the Chemical Weapons Convention, many states had similar problems. But for them, these were considered just insignificant shortcomings that did not undermine the declaration as a whole. I won't go into the details of the issue of the initial declaration now as such, since a discussion on this subject is a prerogative of the Hague Formula, where there is the necessary technical expertise. This expertise, incidentally, is not held within the UN Secretariat. Therefore, it's doubly understandable why this is the case.
However, as a general comment, I'll note that in accordance with established OPCW practice, the initial declaration is a dynamic instrument. And completing declarations of certain stockpiles is something that happens all the time. It isn't an extraordinary event. It could be chemical weapons that were found, somehow lost, or with which there were issues. There are many examples of this. My United States colleagues is surely aware that the United States regularly updates its declaration. As a result of this, their declared stockpiles, albeit insignificantly, continue to increase. Canada, Belgium, France, Germany all do the same, along with other countries. Our German colleagues, for example, which, as is known, were the loudest when it came to anti-Syrian declarations in the Council, in 2013 were themselves late to declare a facility, at which in 2011 and 2012, mustard gas was produced. The reason, supposedly, is that Berlin wasn't aware of the OPCW's request. As you can see, no one is safe from making mistakes. As regards the biggest issues with initial declarations. It's enough to simply mention Libya, in 2012 some 500 undeclared munitions were found, or Iraq, whose initial declaration was not confirmed by anyone. And it was made solely on the basis of existing UN documents. However, in those cases, the Technical Secretariat of the OPCW turned a blind eye to any issues in the initial declaration. In other words, there's every reason to believe that Syria's initial declaration is not an exceptional case. And the frenzy around it is being pent up by the Technical Secretariat and Western delegations artificially. That is why we urged Mr. Arias to clarify in December why the Technical Secretariat is blatantly applying double standards and forgiving minor errors in the initial declarations of certain countries while fanning the flames of accusations to Syria. We never heard an answer to this question. Instead, we see new claims in the report that Syria is supposedly not cooperating sufficiently with the OPCW to resolve the issue. Mr. President, in order to avoid misunderstandings, I would like to underscore that Russia, like any other responsible member state of the OPCW, categorically condemns the use of chemical weapons by anyone, wherever, under any circumstances. That is why it is important for us that the organization be able to fully handle the implementation of its mandate. This is a global issue. It isn't limited to just Syria. The Syrian chemical dossier has simply become a sort of litmus test, thanks to which all of the problems that are complicating the ongoing work of the Technical Secretariat have become evident. The problem itself is much broader, and it is now of a systemic nature. The crisis of trust and confidence in what was once of the most respected international organizations increasing, and unfortunately the organization is now turning into an instrument for political manipulation and punishing the inconvenient. This is a very dangerous trend, and we must put up a collective front to counter it. The OPCW is seriously afflicted with politicization, and those who call turning a blind eye to this only worsen its situation. I would like to ask our colleagues who like accusing Russia of attempts to undermine the authority of the OPCW, who seriously wishes to help the patient? Is it the doctor who diagnoses the disease and provides treatments, which often involves procedures that are uncomfortable for the patient? Or is it those who, against objective facts, tries to convince the patient that they are absolutely healthy? Unfortunately, the OPCW is not healthy, so let's treat it together. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would like to assure you that we intend to continue fighting for restoring trust towards the OPCW and strengthening its authority, as well as uphold the foundations of the WMD non-proliferation regime and actively counter disinformation and blatant lies. And we count on the support of our Security Council colleagues in this matter. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian